Well, okay, you guys, my computer is working. It's the seventh sign of the apocalypse, and it's a beautiful Friday evening here in Salt Lake City, Utah. I am always grateful to be here with all of my friends from all over the globe. It is really cool to know that you guys stay up late and you get into chat and ask such wonderful, thoughtful questions. I love all of you very much, and there's a reason I spend Friday nights here, and it's because, we have a good time. I want to just say some interesting things have developed this week. And one of them, and I'm going to just show you this, I was informed by somebody last night that the new Skinwalker Ranch, apparently they were, said that they would be transparent. But here's the deal. You go to their website, and guess what? Your access is denied unless you are willing to pay a monthly subscription. And then you can get inside access to learn more about behind the scenes things that we were told would just be available to the public in general, but that's clearly not the case. And as most people have predicted from the beginning, since it was Adamantium LLC was started as an entertainment company, unfortunately what we have is entertainment, and a lot of good people in the surrounding area are being fooled, in my opinion. But my feelings on that, I do have to say I watched the show, and for me, it makes me giggle because I had no idea that I could take a bottle, a glue gun, some tape, and I could create the world's most scientifically studied paranormal hotspot right here in my studio. That sounds great. I'm not quite sure how some of these scientists can actually put their name behind this type of thing, but again, like we say, it's entertainment, and they're not being truthful or transparent with things. So anyway, I just need to get that out of the way. But that's me. I'm forever on the case of Skinwalker Ranch and the people involved because I think it's important for the subject. I think it's important for a community, especially here in Utah, to know the truth. And I just have to say, with relation to Governor Gary Herbert appearing on the first episode, if you look at Brandon Fugel's background in the business community, he is on Governor Herbert's Economic and COVID Advisory Board. So politics and UFOs make strange bedfellows, not only with Harry Reid and Robert Bigelow, but also with Brandon Fugel and Gary Herbert. So anyway, on that note, me and my spiciness, I just had to go there. So I am going to bring in our guest now that I've completely, probably traumatized you, Tom.
No, no, not at all. I'm used to it. But
Oh,
it's,
good. Thank you. Sometimes I just, I get so spicy, and I just, this stuff is just, I love it and I care about it. And I know, much like you and your partner, Ted Phillips,
yes.
you care about the people involved, and you care very much about the integrity of the research. And I admire you for that. And I'm really excited to have you on the show tonight. So thank you for being here. And a bit about your background, which is fascinating. I'm going to have you elaborate on that a little bit more. You worked as a dive master, machinist, electrical engineer on projects in the United States, Red China and Bermuda. That must have been interesting. You
Oh,
have to
it was.
elaborate. And you have been an independent researcher since 1969.
Yes.
And I want you to tell the story. So, 1998, Walt Andrus, tell us about all of that, and let's talk about our friend Bruce Whitteman.
Yeah, I'd love to. And I just have to just kick out Bruce's name right here. He's such a wonderful man. He was the original state director for the Mutual UFO Network in Missouri, which, of course, that MUFON was starts roots were in Missouri. Walt Andrus and John Schuessler. And Bruce was in the room when the idea came up and MUFON was born. So Bruce has been there from the beginning. And I was just so privileged to, and the way that came about was I'm an independent researcher in a rural area. And when you're in a rural area, so many witnesses, people that have UFO sightings and reports, when you're the individual that's the go-to guy after a while that doesn't ridicule anybody. And as Jacques Vallée says, and Professor Hynek said that, ridicule is not part of the scientific process. But people get a trust in you and gain respect in you. And I had so many local cases, and I started at 15 years old, going around writing down at that time with pen and paper, taking their reports and things that they wouldn't even share with their own family members sometimes.
Wow.
So I just felt I owed it. I was so interested in it, and I felt I just needed to get some proper education and tooling under my belt, that not thinking in a million years I'd get through to Walt Andrus. I called him on a Sunday morning and got through, and him and I spoke for almost 4 hours on a conversation. And the funny part about it was that I thought he was impressed by my expertise and everything. And he said, "Well, I'm going to make you section director, Tom." And he gave me Bruce Whitteman's number. And I called up Bruce Whitteman that morning or afternoon after we talked. And I said, "Well, hello, Bruce. Walt, do you know so-and-so?" And he said, "Yes, I'm head of MUFON now in Missouri." And I said, "Well, Walt made me section director." And Bruce said at the time, "Well, first of all, I don't even know who the heck you are. And I make the section directors around here. So he said, you need to come see me, and we'll see what you got." And I did that. And then he put me to work for several years with a wonderful gentleman named Jim Cross, which was a retired Air Force captain from the Korean War that specialized in photo analyst. And I learned so much from the man. And I worked with him for 3 years out in the field. And he taught me a little bit. Of course, the downside of that was, at the time, I was just getting around to, I had one of the first digital cameras. And him, as my mentor, he said, "Well, Tom, that's great." He said, "But when we get out of the realm of negatives to work with," he said, "the best digital photograph means nothing to me." So, I mean, he took the wind out of my sails, but I did see that he was right at the time. But that's the way I got involved in MUFON in the beginning.
And, I just have to say that I love Bruce. I mean, oh my gosh, he is such a, you meet him and it's like he's got this larger than life, he's like a gentle, a teddy bear. He's just such a kind, wonderful individual. And I'm so grateful that I've had the opportunity to meet him and speak with him. And
yes.
And you and I, when we had our talk earlier this week, you had mentioned how much he has accomplished and really what he did for promoting and giving people their first starts at conferences and things. And that, I hope to get him on the show again sometime to talk a little bit more about that. But it's very impressive, and he's still, like all of us, just is entranced by the subject.
Oh, he is. And, he's such a wonderful man. And I've spoke 3 times this week with him, and twice he's undergoing chemotherapy right now. And twice I spoke with him while he was undergoing chemotherapy. And that gives you still his devotion to the subject matter. And he's just such a wonderful man. And I will say that practically every name you see in ufology now of any stature had gotten their start at a Missouri MUFON conference under Bruce. Bruce gave everybody a chance. And back in the day, the Missouri conferences were even better than the LA conferences, or that was just a place to be. So it was anyone you can virtually think, if their name's out there in ufology now, chances are they had their first time before the public at one of Bruce's conferences. So,
and I bet the stories you could hear.
Oh yeah.
It's funny. I have stories just from the conferences I've been to, so I can't even imagine being on the end of being the conference organizer and then dealing with some of the personalities in the subject and things. I'm sure that that would be interesting.
Yeah, it is. It really is. And just so many individuals. And one of his closest friends that we did a couple productions with, John Greenwald, which I know, the Black Vault, you're so familiar with.
Yes.
John is Ted Phillips, I will say, trusted John explicitly, because John is the real deal. And Ted worked with John quite a while. And I guess it kind of dates me, but I was there when John was very young at one of Bruce's first conferences. And I think it was the second time that John had ever been before a camera or did a conference. So that's quite a few years ago. But
And I will say that I mean, I really admire John Greenwald
yes,
as well. I mean, he has done all the hard work, doing the FOIA requests, holding people's feet to the fire when things don't look right. He is willing to stand up, and as a result, it's like he's taken a lot of flack, especially as of late with some of the people that are
yeah.
social media trolls, and that's really unfortunate because really contributes a lot and is serious about the subject. So,
Oh yes, yes. And it's just, it's a shame that just so many individuals that are out there that I know I could throw names all night long, but you'd know all of them. And like I said, and I was there even when Dr. Robert Woods gave his first lecture and presented his papers. And I mean, when he got done, he came down and sat by my wife and I and asked how he was, and I mean, the man was phenomenal. He knew his material. He was just so knowledgeable and had just the documentation the man had. It just, there's no end to it. So, but everybody, out there was friends with Bruce. Stanton Freeman was a good friend of Bruce, and Chris O'Brien is a good personal friend of mine, and Chris is a friend, and but it just goes on and on. There's no end to it.
isn't that neat? I mean, Chris has been really helpful with me with the Skinwalker Ranch
Yes.
research over the years, and I am looking forward to I'm starting a new website. I will just throw this out here, which will be dedicated to Skinwalker Ranch and my research, and I will be putting forward all of the case reports, 2 years of case reports that I believe the public needs to see, and then we can understand exactly why there was no more funding allocated to Skinwalker Ranch. And it's unfortunate that working with Ted, couldn't have received funding to study what you're studying. And again, I wanted to say that I admire you and Ted both for your integrity of wanting to keep witnesses safe, wanting to keep the location safe, not wanting people to come in and make money or kind of stalk and terrorize the families that are involved in this. That
Right.
says a lot.
Right. And Ted felt, so much. We just owed it to the people. He had over 368 witnesses at Marley Woods that we worked with these people on a confidential basis. And Ted was such a wonderful man. He could get in, he could meet somebody in 5 minutes and be a close friend, even if they had their reservations about even speaking with us. He would get that element of trust in them. And of course, there again, with that number of witnesses, they didn't want to share this with their own families at times.
Right.
They didn't gain, financially off this, didn't want it known. So what possible motive would they have but absolute truth in their statements? And Ted and with the ranch owners out at Marley, we absolutely, they trusted us. We had keys to the ranch. We could come and go as we wanted, whenever we wanted. And we stayed there at times, weeks on end sometimes. And they're great people to work, but we just couldn't betray that trust. And we did have individuals that would get in there at times. And one property owner's, their relations were actually a deputy sheriff, and people were escorted off the property at times. And so we had that element to work with also. But I will tell you, the ranchers out there, unfortunately, they're also getting up in their years now. But they're such wonderful men, and they trusted us. And we never could betray that trust. And there again, through the years, we had funding. We had to leave at times to do the lecture circuit. And let me tell you, when Ted was in his prime doing the lectures and MUFON conferences, there was nobody better than Ted Phillips. He had a dry sense of humor, and the documentation he would bring forth in his years of physical trace experience, which he had to date working with Alan Hynek. There's the man himself. He had over 3,000 physical trace cases documented, soil samples. So when he gave a presentation, I'll tell you, you usually could hear a pin drop in the auditorium. Now, but the downside of that was the man was a nuts and bolts man. He always wanted to be in the field with his research. He didn't like leaving his research at all. So he had to balance that always. But
I think it's
but no,
hard because, too, it's like you get so obsessed, by this subject, and it's a hard subject for multiple reasons. Not only because you're spending your own money trying to go out there, you're trying to keep people safe, and then you've got the fact that it's such an odd topic, and that can be in and of itself very hard on close personal relationships. It can be hard on your business, your professional career, and things.
yeah.
And so there's so many things to think about when somebody does come out in a public sense to talk about this and their research.
Oh, you're so right. And it is hard. It's hard on relationships. And luckily, I have a very, very understanding wife. Next year, we're going to be married 50 years.
Wow.
So we did get married young, but she's very understanding. And even in her when we were engaged, even she'd go out with me investigating cases in the field. And but I'll tell you, even at that, it gets, when I worked for a offshore powerboat company, my longest day was I was in Bermuda in the morning working, instructing some maintenance people how to do the electronic equipment on a boat. And that evening, or 12 a.m. in the morning, I was in the field in Marley Woods in Missouri. So that gives you an idea of and every one of the team members was that devoted, I will tell you.
Wow. And so let's go back a little bit and then talk about, so you get involved when you're 15. You're out there interviewing people, and I think that is so cool. Do you still have those interviews?
Yes, we do. Unfortunately, very few on tape or video. We do have some. Mainly it's just handwritten notes that Ted and we would take, and he would go back, and I can't tell you in his office, since his passing, which Ted passed away over 2 years ago, and Ted was born in January 20th, 1942, but it's just such a volume, which I'm sure I know you're going through now with an individual's work and heritage, but it's just such a task to go through, reams of 3-ring notebooks, file cabinets, floppy disks, jump drives, hard drives, computers. Some you can't get in, some are locked up, and but where do you start? And then people always want to know, well, what's taken so long? So it's.
Well, and as we talked about the other day, it's like, what's taking so long? Well, I mean, most people have families, they have jobs, they have lives, they have financial needs, and this is it's an expensive labor of love.
Oh yes.
To
yes.
preserve the history of people in the subject, and I think it makes me happy to know that there are some things that Ted has and his family has, and that you're going through all of that. I think that is really, really cool. And I want to ask you too, because a couple years ago there was a question about some of the lost samples of trace cases. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, it's kind of unfortunate. Ted still has some of his physical trace actually in his possession in his office. In fact, I mean, like one of his premier cases, the Delphos case, he still has several pounds of the soil samples in his office, and going through his office, it was incredibly interesting to me to go through the original soil sampling and see all this material, and then come across the original Polaroid camera that the Johnsons gave Ted that photographed the glowing ring, which Ted experimented several times trying to recreate the glowing ring, never could. And the whole story there. She only had one photo in the camera to take this glowing ring, and incredible. I mean, but some of the soil samples in Ted's through the years working with Alan Hynek, some of it got mixed up in his materials, and it went with some of Alan's materials, and so we're working on that, and but that as it is, I will tell you that Ted's own materials and what we got left to work with is a lot even in that to work with, and so, and we're going to try to get a book out. We're working in the family, and we're trying to see the best way to get that out, and but there again, it actually could be a volume of sets. His Physical Trace Catalog, which was published by Kufos.
Yes. And I've got to just...
There you go. And you'll see who edited Mimi.
Yes, Mimi Hynek.
Hynek edited that, and Alan wrote the preface in that. And so, I mean, and that's a great piece of work, which you can still obtain. But it's just, it's from the beginning. And I will tell you that there's so much of Blue Book that Ted was a part of. And of course, everyone knows that when Blue Book supposedly terminated, it was the alphabet just changed, but it never really terminated. And Ted worked for several years with the same people, and there's so much forgotten and not known history that goes along with that. That Stanton T. Freeman was a great friend of Ted's. And Stanton was even envious of Ted so much because he knew what Ted knew, what Ted was a part of. And every time we spoke at conferences where Stanton was at, he'd go over to Ted and he'd ask him, he'd grab Ted and he'd say, "Ted, did you write your book? Did you write your book?" And Ted said, "No, I'm working on it," and then Stan would grab me and he said, "Damn it, Tom," he said, "make sure he writes his book." And unfortunately, he started it several times, but never really got anywhere with it. So
it's hard, when you're going in so many directions. And I wanted to say that I've got this, as well.
Yes,
which is, I mean, it's just so. I love having this history at my fingertips, and I can't imagine what it must be like for you to be in Ted's office and going through things like that. That's really. I mean, for me, when I hold some of these papers in my hands, it's like I know that I'm one of a handful of people that has actually seen this, and it's a really special experience. It's humbling, and it's very it means a lot to me to have the opportunity to help preserve somebody's work, and I'm sure because you were friends with Ted and he was a mentor to you, that means a great deal to you.
Yeah, and it's just when you go in his office, and the first time I was there after he passed, I went in, and there's so much at Ted's work, and you just feel like his presence is right there with you. And the hardest time when I actually, after a week, I left the office, I just about couldn't leave the office. For some reason, it just tore me up. Not so much getting there and being there, but when I had to leave, I come to the realization that he actually wasn't there anymore, and it just tore me up. And but he was just such a wonderful man and knowledgeable, and Ted's history. Of course, Ted was an engineer himself, and he worked on the Minuteman missile project. Actually, did the laying out the groundwork, and he was actually a professional musician. He was a professional photographer. He was just such a capable man in every realm that, it's just hard to believe that intellect is, when it's gone, it's gone, so, but we're trying to do it justice, and it just, I just might add just a little bit. People have asked me what got Ted Phillips started in ufology. And just a real short little story that Ted, actually, his father, he was from Sedalia, Missouri. His father worked in a radio station. And there was a report came in of two Air Force pilots in World War II that had close, like Foo Fighters, they used to call them, sightings, and I mean within 30 foot of their cockpit. And his father got Ted an interview with these two men in Sedalia at the radio station. So Ted was interested in the subject, but when he did this, as Ted said, it didn't get any better than that. And he stayed in close contact with these pilots till they passed away, and they wrote out reports for him. They even had statements from the complete fighter bomber crew, the whole crew, that they had their names and statements, what they experienced. So that was really the start of how that Ted got professional at that age.
And, you know, I think it really says something, because a lot of times people that investigate UFO cases, it's kind of like the one and done. I mean, they do the interview and then they completely, okay, thanks, we're on to the next, or it's either case closed or whatever. But I know for me, when I interview people initially, I mean, I keep in contact with them. You know, I mean, I've done that for years and years and years, and go back and get video interviews and audio interviews, because I think that's really important.
Yes.
To that. And so that's really cool that he did that.
Yeah, it really is, and then, Ted's history, a lot of people believe that Ted's first working with Alan was in Socorro, New Mexico, with Lonnie Zamora's case. Well, he was there with Hynek, but actually his first case working and meeting with Alan Hynek was in Missouri at a very great, it's never been documented to any extent, really. And there was a case in Columbia, Missouri. And this case involved 3 hours of a family that lived in a mobile home outside of Columbia, Missouri. I mean, there was physical trace laid down evidence, white residue powder, tree limbs broke, and these objects terrorized this family for over 3 hours. And Ted, at that time, thought he knew a way to contact Alan, got his secretary, and not expecting Alan to call him back. And Alan called Ted back, and they met that way. And Alan said, "Do you think I could get to speak with these people?" And Ted said, "Oh, absolutely. I could bring you to them and meet these people and work the case." And so that's actually the first case that Ted did, was in Missouri, was the first meeting.
Wow. How interesting. And I want to just show, because you were so kind to send me photos, and I'm just going to show this photo and have you explain. I mean, obviously we can, we can see Jacques Vallée, you, Ted.
And that was Douglas Trumbull, the one behind the special effects in Close Encounters, Brainstorm, and 2001 Space Odyssey, and so many others. And Douglas is so involved in ufology, he was, and he built up camera packages, and he was such great friends with Vallée and Ted. He knew Ted, and he brought some equipment out to Marley and had some, a while back, I did a memorial to Ted, and I had interviewed Jacques Vallée, and Jacques was so great on that. He actually recanted the story of what happened at Marley with Douglas's equipment that he brought out. And the property owner there again at Marley, he's such a great man. He built a two-story structure to us, an office for Ted and a place for us to sleep, and with a kitchen and everything. But when Douglas came out and Jacques was there then, Douglas set up this camera in the old cabin out there. And this thing was a very high-tech piece of equipment on a very heavy tripod. And we have a phenomenon out there called the North Mystery Light. And it was really rough, a lot of weather outside. And Douglas thought it would be better if we could put this behind glass or in a building structure to film that area. So we put it in this old cabin at the north window, and locked, like I said, 75 pounds in all, camera, tripod, locked it down through the window. And this is just some of the strange activity, not unlike the original Skinwalker people. The property owner, we set it up, locked the doors. The next morning we go in, and Douglas actually got aggravated. He thought somebody was messing with us. Here, this piece of equipment, the camera tripod, the whole camera and everything was turned 30 degrees away from the window. Now, how do you explain that? And Douglas, you know, he made some accusations that somebody got in there, and of course, Jock said he was there with us. He said, "No, Doug," he said, "nobody's been in this room. The property owner had the only key, and he wasn't there that night after he left." So, you know, how do you explain that type of phenomena? But we experienced a lot of things like that out there, you know.
Well, and talk a little bit, and I want to just, again, I'm going to just show a picture and have you comment on this, because I am mesmerized by what you've sent me. So
Yeah.
talk about this photo.
Yeah, that's a phenomenon. That's what we had light balls, and then we had a phenomenon out there called the ambers. Ted named them out of just the visual aspect of them. And they weren't quite spherical as light balls. They had a little bit of a more lenticular shape. But Ted deemed them the ambers, and this is some ambers in flight, in motion, caught. But that's that image you have there that Ted took.
Wow. And that must, I mean, describe how everybody first got involved with Marley, and then, you know, was there an air of skepticism when you went out there? When did the first things occur? And then, I mean, just give us I would love to know more detail about all of that.
Yeah, Marley is a ranch that encompasses it's 2 miles north and south and 3 miles, you know, east and west. And it's two ranches that butt up to one another. One's growing as we speak. It's about 1,200 acres now. One's about 800 acres. And it's just such a large area. And it goes back, I will say, 3 generations we tracked it in the area that it goes back. It's always a phenomenon, always been there. Ted could never find a reason why. And the reason the property owner experienced so much of it, he just wanted to get to the bottom of it. So he got in touch again with the Mutual UFO Network. And again, here the Bruce Whitteman aspect of it comes into play. He got hold of Bruce. And of course, he was close personal friends with Ted Phillips. And at that time, Ted had been in and out working with MUFON over the years so many times. At that point, Ted wasn't really involved with MUFON. And Bruce asked him as a personal favor to go investigate this ranch. Now, I will tell you, when Ted first got the initial verbal reports of Marley Woods, he wasn't too interested in it. And then Bruce passed on the written work from one of the property owners. And one of the property owners is such a prolific writer. He takes photos, he just writes journals. Well, when Bruce got that to Ted, and Ted started reading about what was called the white light balls, yellow light balls, red light balls, the unseen force, and what has occurred on the ranch with this, and even going into the coloration of the light balls, some being more benign, some usually when the red ones get there, that precedes the bad things happening, and it brings on the unseen force. Now, the reason when Ted read that and came upon that, he had worked overseas on a case and a lot of people don't know this, but when Alan had prior engagements or was sick, Ted filled in for Alan overseas on a lot of investigations. And a couple in particular that Ted was a part of overseas involved the light balls, the unseen force, where really, really bad things happen. And when Ted read that, he was out there the next week then investigating, talking to the property owners, because Ted actually thought that at some point from his experience overseas, this was really going to go south in a hurry and things were really going to go bad on the ranches. Now, over the years, he come to believe that they never would. But that is basically why how he got involved and why he basically spent the rest of his life at Marley Woods.
And so was there ever a point in time where he questioned that potentially this could be something that is man-made technology?
as I said before, I was the same way as Ted, believe me, back in the day. Ted was a nuts and bolts man. He wanted to do, Alan Hynek had Jacques Vallée doing the software and the documentation on one side. He had Ted out in the field doing the physical trace, which Ted loved, doing the compaction test, the soil sampling and such, determining the weight, the craft when they put down prints, which contrary to popular belief is several thousand pounds sometimes on each tripod put down in the dirt. But Ted didn't want to go there at first not so much the paranormal aspect of it, but just looking for any other answers. He just wanted to go into the nuts and bolts of it. Like myself, I was uncomfortable in the early days. If I heard a Bigfoot report associated with a UFO sighting, I mean, it turned me off. I didn't even want to go talk to people. But as Ted did, through our personal experiences, and as Ted said later, that Alan Hynek and Jacques Vallée were so far ahead of their time. It's just so simplistic to believe that this little green man coming from Alpha Centauri, and Jacques Vallée, and there again, spending so much time with this man, I respect him so much, and he proved, and we proved at Marley, that it's all dimensionally based and not interplanetary. Now, if it's interdimensional, that can be one and above, can be everything. But we had the one thing I'll never forget. I heard it so many times, and working with Jacques, it just the one statement that he always had, and it's quite a statement, but he said, "We have evidence that the phenomena has the ability to create a distortion of the sense of reality or substitute an artificial sensation for the real one." Now, what that means in a nutshell is what you see and experience sometimes can work you. It will be what you want it to be at times. You'll see what it wants you to perceive. Not saying at times you're not seeing the real thing. And when things come through the interdimensional boundaries, they're just as real as you and I. They leave physical trace cases, which we picked up at Marley. And we'll get in if you want the cryptids, but you always, and I would advise anybody in paranormal work and ufology to always keep that in the back of your mind as a precaution, that this has the ability to feed you false sensations and work you sometimes. So you're dealing with an intelligence in the phenomena, and that's the one thing Ted we're dealing with an intelligence that's always one step ahead of us. And we truly felt it was monitoring. Ted called Marley Woods his living laboratory. And Ted and, Jacques Vallée even said, "I feel there's higher potential for high strangeness in Marley than even Skinwalker at times." And it's quite a statement to say that,
I would say, having researched Skinwalker Ranch, that's probably a good statement. So I sometimes I wonder if, in my opinion, the carefully crafted mythology of Skinwalker Ranch wasn't taken by Bigelow and his comrades from the work that you were doing at Marley. So, because it was always interesting to me to see that the lack of any, there weren't instruments there. They weren't, I was told by a specific person that was a scientist for NIDS that worked with Bigelow, that Bigelow did not allow, that he gave very limited access to any of them to go to the ranch, which I found really curious. And so, at the end of the day, is that just kind of a red herring, and a place like Marley Woods, a place where things are truly happening? I don't know.
Yeah, and I can speak about it now. At the time, we weren't supposed to speak about it, but a lot of people knew that for a short, brief time, we were affiliated with Robert Bigelow. Combe Keller was out with us working too at times, and it was just a relationship. We liked the people, but it was just a control of material issues come up, and it didn't work out. We really had high hopes for it because, quite frankly, our financial resources were very limited. So we went where we had to get help, and that was kind of the relationship in the beginning. But I do believe there is a core of truth and things that happen. You go back in the old history and the people like I know you've dealt with from Skinwalker. But there again, Ted's, unlike so many people in ufology, and I don't mean to step on any toes, but believe me, we worked with a lot of people, and Ted's method was to go into an area with a small footprint, interject as little as you could as a scientific process. You don't drop in a large body of individuals or equipment or resource at first, and always you're there to monitor. And at some point when things happen, you can try to capture it and do the science on, just the overall, as far as even getting into the weather and everything. But he always believed to just go in with a small footprint as possible. And of course, in the Bigelow, as you know, that when they initially took that over, they went in with brought in multi-people, scientific teams, mobile units, scientific units. They trucked in, and it shut down the activity for a while. And we learned quickly at Marley that this always has a step ahead of you. You think as Ted said, he thought it was his living laboratory, but at times he just said that we're in its laboratory. It's experimenting and it's working us.
So the bait pins. I mean, did Ted ever want to put up bait pins anywhere?
No. We were all about monitoring, observing, security cameras, the best we could buy in the day. And there again, we were working with VHS equipment and then finally hard drives, DVRs. But, we had an old windmill out there. We set up 4 or 5 cameras on this, and we had light bulbs pass between the windmill and our structure we stayed in, and not only burn out the circuitry and the cameras on the windmill, but actually eject VHS tapes from the players inside. And we had a bookshelf at the time with Ted would keep the VHS tapes in there before he would take them home, and it would wipe these tapes clean just as professionally as if you had it done. So the EMF and now, was it done intentionally or a byproduct of their technology? I think it was a little bit of both, because when they didn't want us in certain locations, we knew about it, and when they didn't want things captured, we couldn't capture it. So you're always dealing with an intelligence that's ahead of you.
Well, and it's interesting because I know that at one point in time, I was listening to a lecture or an interview of Ted earlier today, and he was mentioning that the goal was to put up live stream cameras. Yes. and that you were working on a website and you were putting information forward. And so, what happened to the website?
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Adam Johnson, which was a team member and still is, he's gone on to have his own production company now in filming and doing great work. Adam was our webmaster, put a great, fantastic website we had, and we did get some revenue from that. Unfortunately, there again, the individual we worked with, they required we take that down, which was really detrimental to us and our group. But we had a really wonderful website, and Ted's dream at the time, unfortunately the technology in the day was not what it is now. And even to this day, it's hard to get internet reception out there. But Ted's dream was to have a set of cameras linked that people could go to the website, anytime, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, click on there and monitor this stuff and see what's going on, and actually, aid us in the monitoring of this. And unfortunately, we never had the funds or resources or the technology then. And I have looked in since then, going now with some of the game cameras that actually you can link them, just like your cell phone. And I actually went in, but it's an extremely expensive process. I've even looked into there's a way to hook this up with sat phone technology to link this back to a base, so that even by using, when the internet would go out, we could have a system that this would go to sat phone and we would still be able to receive the signal. But it is extremely expensive, I will tell you, and labor intensive, and which we're short of both, of course, right now. We hope to do better than that, but we're working on some projects. But that's what you deal with, And that was one of Ted. And the other thing I got to tell you, Ted was he was a model builder, and the man was experimenting. If we'd have had the drone technology that's out there now, Ted was so far ahead of his time. He was making model airplanes and taping cameras to them, trying to fly. His dream was to have something like a drone. When we would be on Site 1 and we'd see this light source, Ted believed was a portal, come on a mile away on Site 2, his dream was to be able to fly this right into that light source, that portal. And had we had the technology, the drone technology that we got now, it's just incredible what I think the man could have done.
And I just have to say, excuse my look of terror. My big cat is right behind my computer and is, we're living on the edge here. Let me just say. So if anything goes down, if the computer crashes to the floor, we'll blame it on Mufasa. It's never a dull moment in Dr. Doolittle's playland here with all the animals. It wouldn't
be the first time in ufology that happens, believe me.
No, I'm telling you. It's so funny. But, when I look at something that is, to me, is exceptional, and I talk about this all the time, I look at Project Heshdalen over in Norway, and the fact that, after 35, 40 years, which has almost been about the same amount of time that we've seen the Skinwalker stuff, they've actually published scientific papers. They have the live stream cameras. They have all of that information that is accessible to the public for free. And I think that sounds like, what you and Ted were trying to do is get information out about that, and then also to try to obtain funding for, like you mentioned, trying to get equipment that is really, it's expensive. It's expensive to put game cameras everywhere, to have a website where you have the capability to do all of this. It's just, there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. And so, would there ever be a potential that the website could be resurrected?
Yeah, we're working on that. The domain name of the original one, of course, was sold. We're trying to get it back, and we're working with some people to try to get a decent website back up on the Marley Woods project. And then, of course, I just have to do it justice, just throw this in here just briefly, and we're trying to get one up on Ted's other passion in life that he devoted the rest of his life on, was the Moonshaft project, but we'll get into that later. But we're working on that, and it's so important, and that was Ted's dream. His main ambition was getting this material out to the public, where he so wanted it, believe me.
And so I just have to ask you about the domain name, because there's some interesting things going on with domain name wars. And so, can you say who bought the domain name?
Yeah, it was UFO Physical was the original, where our website was. And then Ted had a Physical Trace website, his own, that he had produced for over the years, and that's gone too now. But we're trying to bring back the Physical Trace one, and we're trying to combine one with the Marley Woods Research Center. And but till we do, we're working with some other people and some productions that we hope that will lead to a pretty decent website again, because you know, you have to have that up to really have a place where we can aim this technology at, you know, so people can get on there. And it sounds terrible again, you know, I hate to mention money, but a place where people can make donations, you know, if they want, and get on it and view this stuff possibly, you know, but yeah, there's a lot to be done in that area yet, but that was Ted's goal, to get this out, you know, just not in a file this stuff away, and it's of no use. He always wanted to get it out to the public, you know. Yeah.
And that's so incredible, because I think, and that's one of the many issues I have with Bigelow and his crew, is they've never been forthright with any of the information that they've collected. And it's also been, it's interesting to see with regard to Skinwalker Ranch. It's like, here we've got this top secret place, and yet we're writing books about it, and we're allowing the GPS coordinates to be published so everybody on the planet can come, you know, get their selfies taken at the gate. And I mean, that whole, it just seems so entirely different from what you and Ted have done.
Oh,
and so
yeah, we worked so hard to keep, you know, to keep this place, and not just for drama, you know, or intrigue. We just owed it to the people. And I will tell you, there were times when we would do lectures, and when it would be in Missouri, we'd do a lecture, and the property owner sometime would come and listen to the lecture from Marley Woods. And of course, nobody knew who the man was, but there were some individuals that guessed who he was. And I will tell you, they followed the property owner several hundred miles home, and just to connect and try to get on the place that way. And it goes to the extreme. Now, this is hard to believe, but we used to put some imagery of our structure, our two-story structure, our research tower out there at lectures and on the internet, our website. And I don't know, have any idea how many hours an individual took to do this on Google Earth, but they went through Google Earth and actually found our structure and identified the location from Google Earth. So we had to take down our structures from our website. Now, I mean, it's hard to believe people would go to that length, but we experienced that.
And that must have been really frightening, though, for this person to have. I mean, knowing that somebody is stalking them and traveling, that willing to go to that length to invade their, you know, personal territory. That definitely is very unnerving.
You're exactly right. It is stalking, and believe me, these people sometimes would go out in the pasture, you know, with the rancher's beef cattle. I mean, 100 head of cattle, and set up tents. I mean, and they would actually have to be run off, you know, with sheriff's deputies at times. So, and until you experience that, you just can't believe, you know, the length that some people will go to. And I know they experience, you know, that at Skinwalker, what they go through, even behind the scenes, you know.
And yet the same people that broke onto the property year after year are on the TV show.
Yeah.
Go figure. But you know, it is interesting, and yeah, it is frightening. And I know I've had my own personal experiences with stalkers and strange people in the UFO field. So, but you know,
there is that.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I just have to ask you, because Peter in chat wants to know if, and his question, could advanced hologram secret technology tests be an explanation for some of the things that we're seeing at Marley Woods?
You know, we've had several people, including one of our team members, research that. And there are no military bases. We've never felt the presence of so-called black helicopters, any involvement. I know a lot of people at one time, they thought because we were involved with Bigelow that we had a government connection there, and we never really seen that, to be honest with you. And so I don't really believe it's anything that's ours, technology out there. But I will tell you, I do believe there's a technology, like I said, that's dimensionally based, frequency driven, and when it's out there, it's monitoring you, and you can't get ahead of it. And you know, we'd be out in the field several hours in 30-degree weather. The minute you break down your cameras, and this sounds like an excuse to people, unless you've been out in this environment, the minute you put your camera equipment down and turn equipment off, that's exactly when things would take place. So I really don't believe it's any of our technology involved out there, holographic or in any other way. And then we can get into later too. We really believe a lot of what we dealt with out there that was the bad guy that was harmful to animals and mutilation and us at times was of microwave frequency and origin, which they're skinwalkers claiming now that they're dealing with out there is microwave energy. So, but I don't believe it was from us. I really don't.
And that is interesting. And I wanted to show this photo because you had an experience out there, and I'll show this photo, and you can tell us what happened.
Yes. Yeah, that, and here again, for a long time, Ted gave us the discretion to speak about things that happened to us out there, but as Ted said, he really didn't want to take the focus off his work, and he knew if we'd bring the more extreme things that he felt that the researchers shouldn't be part of the research. Now, later on, he said, Tom, I said, I don't care. He said, when I'm gone, and you guys can speak about this, that's fine. But he said, you know, you can talk about it now, that's fine. But basically, there's a phenomenon out there called the light beam, which the property owners, ranchers have experienced. Goes back into 2 generations on the light beam experience. It's an intense light beam that seems to be sweeping the field at times, like it's in a hunting motion, like it's looking for something. Very intense, white, focused beam. No craft associated with, no noise, no wind. And Adam Johnson and I was the first one in our team to experience this. We were in a deer stand there again, 30 degrees, 4 hours, 5 hours, and just started putting our equipment down. And I noticed over Adam's shoulder, intense like a spotlight coming down in the field, working across a 7-acre field, hitting the timber. And when it reached the other side of the timber, it went off, and the focus point at that time came from that side, and the light beam traveled across the field, went to the bottom of the deer stand we were in, and extinguished in an instant. And it was more or less, I truly feel that it was letting us know that it knew exactly where we were. Now, the incident that happened that is the result of it. That's a personal image of me. What had happened on that was Ted and I were on Site 2 one night, which is about a mile from Site 1. We were driving back after a long night, going in early morning and this is a dirt road off a gravel road, off a paved road, all 1,200 acre, private gated, nothing in there but us, no other SUVs or anything. And as we're driving out of that on the dirt road, coming up to the gravel road, I noticed coming up the road behind me, and I just hate to draw the analogy to Close Encounters, but that's what it was. I seen a light coming up the road behind us, and in an instant, it was on our vehicle, and it lit up our vehicle internally to a degree you almost couldn't see. And I remember looking at my dashboard, my vehicle, which was a Trailblazer. You could see in the air vents to the furthermost place the dirt in it. You could see the fake vinyl grain on the dash was just elaborate. I mean, and at this point I told Ted, I said, Ted, are you seeing this? And Ted looked at me and he said, well, hell yes, I'm seeing this, Tom. And instinctively, I stopped the vehicle completely. We both jumped out, which is not probably a wise thing to do. We looked up at this thing, the light, and I know a little bit about lighting, and I don't know how you recreate this effect. And I spoke to others in lighting, much more knowledgeable in lighting than I am, in Hollywood even. Ted and I viewed, the light had come off the vehicle and retracted, went vertically up in a really tight, focused, pure white, dense beam of light. and into, we didn't see a craft, we didn't see a structured craft, no wind, no noise, into, as Ted described, a twisting reflex motion. And as it went into a pinpoint, it was gone. It just switched off like that. Now, we got back to Site 1 where we stayed. When we got back, Ted went to unload his equipment, camera equipment, which Ted was a professional photographer, took care of his equipment meticulously. And I noticed he got out of the vehicle, dropped his camera bags, went up to the building, leaned against it, and actually vomited. And I said, Ted, are you okay? And Ted said, well, Tom, I don't know. I'm working on it. And I said, go on. He finally got better. And I said, go on up. I'll get your equipment. He went on up. I took his camera equipment up. And, well, we left there 2 weeks later. And I thought I was lucky at the time. In hindsight, I wish that would have happened to me. I got back, and my first effect was I had a burning scalp sensation. I couldn't touch my head. And I went to my local doctor, and I've got this all documented because Ted insisted on that. They treated me, they tested me, they thought it was shingles. It wasn't shingles. The local rural doctor just thought, he said, oh, you got to burn somehow. You know, you stayed in the sun too long or something. And I was under opioid painkillers for a week and a half. It hurt so bad. Then shortly after, in a period of less than not even over a month, my hair turned from the dark brown to white to the color you've seen in that photo there in a very short, same haircut. You can tell the growth there is the same. It went dramatic change. And had that been the extent of my problems, I would have been happy. But then over the years, next year, 2, 3 years, I really had vision problems to the point my vertical lines all became wavy, almost to the point disorienting at times. I went to the eye doctor. They sent me to a specialist, and they determined I had a thing called macular cyst. Now, at the time, I was much younger. I said, what causes this? And they said, usually we see this in much older people. It's a product of old age. We really don't even know what causes it in old age, but that's usually the people that get this. And then along with that, I had cataracts. And now when they take a laser out the macular cyst, you can come out of that surgery with a really good effect, or you can lose vision. Luckily, I had a really good effect. I restored my vision. I had to have cataracts removed, which they did. On my final, making a long story short, and to this day, believe me, I still have vision problems. Some days I wear glasses. Some days I drive my local eye doctor crazy. He gets mad at me. But I went back for the final to have the bubble removed and my vision tested. And I had a young surgeon, eye doctor, remove the bandage. And I asked him, and it was such just a thing. I was just so blessed that I asked him this, because when I asked him, I said, what really, do you know what causes this? And he said, no. He said, we really don't, Tom. He said, but the only time I've ever seen this in my career was, he said, about a year ago, we had 2 cell tower workers, and one of the workers were up on the tower, and they fired up this microwave cell tower equipment, and he got zapped pretty good. And as a byproduct, he had to have macular cyst and cataracts removed from the microwave energy. Now, when he said this, you could have knocked me over with a feather, because that was so beneficial. In the research we did that Ted had done in his past experience, they had determined so much of what they dealt with was microwave damage energy. So, and there's other animal effects in Marley Woods that have been known. A really terrible case involving a horse that Ted deemed, with some other people he sent to work to, that it was microwave in origin. So there again, this really all fit in with what we were dealing with. So, I always warn people when you go out in this field, and just as a sidebar to this, now I can add this. This is new information that I can only give you a premiere on your show now.
Well, thank you.
We were involved in it's going to air probably in August with some people, and everybody will know this gentleman's name. You know his name. We filmed some episodes, some shows out there, and we were in the field. I had a new piece of equipment that I bought that was totally obligated. I had set it to monitoring the microwave spectrum frequencies. And this thing had audible cues and visual cues. It had a green to red warning system. It went green, yellow, red. 3 times when we were out in Marley Wood in site 2 in the middle of a field, no power lines, nothing out there for miles. 3 times I experienced that went into the red areas, which means you better get out of there. You're involved in some pretty serious microwave energy. Thankfully, it only lasted for a matter, not even in one case, maybe a minute. So it was very brief, but it happened 3 times to us. And that was recent. So this is very much out there. And I really believe it was letting us know that it knew we were out there. It knew that I knew what it could do. So,
and thank you for bringing up the power lines, because that is, when you're looking at, I mean, now again, I'm going to go back to Skinwalker Ranch, because this is something they don't talk about on the TV show, but there are some pretty significant power lines running on the ranch and around the ranch. And so how important is that to kind of disclose that information, and what effects would power lines have with regard to readings?
Yeah, besides the high EMF, there is, and I don't have to tell you this, there is a long history in ufology of structured craft being in conjunction with power lines. I really believe there's a connection there. What it is, I have my own suspicions, but I can't prove it. But I don't believe it's there to energize their craft or to make use of the energy flowing through the power lines. I don't believe that's really relevant to it. I do believe that there is a purpose that they're in conjunction with them, though. And there are theories out there that it's possibly this aids in a dimensional boundary, easing the way they can open and shut the dimensional boundaries, or it promotes this, or it's used as a beacon or some kind of navigational thing. There's so many theories out there. It's just, but I don't believe they're plugging into these things, charging their batteries.
But do you think that there could be a potential, though, I mean, especially when people aren't disclosing that there are power lines around a specific property, because those can have effects on things. Specifically, if you've got the high voltage power line around, that can have effects on equipment, and obviously human beings as well. It's very dangerous. But I mean, what would you say, like, if you're doing field research, what are some of the things that you go in and you look at in a specific area and say, okay, we're going to monitor this, we're going to make sure that this isn't affecting our equipment and the data that we are receiving? Tell us what a good investigation would look like.
Yeah, and I don't mean to step on toes here again, but the high-tech equipment is very good and very useful, and we do have some ourselves. But you always want to build in redundancy with simplistic, more analog type equipment. You want to have a few things to fall back on that doesn't have the electronic circuitry as much. In the analog type, like tri-field meters, it's field coils that just respond to the energy itself. Now that can be damaged too, but not as likely. And just simple things, you can fall back like a compass is great. It's a great indicator. And, but it's great to have the high tech stuff, but I'd always say to build in redundancy along with it, because I will tell you that this stuff knows your weakness and it will prey upon it. Believe me, even like EMF effects. And you've heard this so many times. I know you've experienced probably. We'd be out there and charge. Ted got on us, boy. If we didn't have our battery packs charged up fully, when we were ready to go out, and typically people believe in ufology and that in paranormal, 12 o'clock is a bewitching hour, but we have found, and so many people have learned in ufology and paranormal, that 3 a.m. tends to be a high point more than any. So we would at times gear ourselves to go out at 3 a.m. and stay out. But if we didn't have our battery packs charged and equipment ready to go, we heard about it. But we would take fully charged redundancy where we might need 2 battery packs on equipment. We'd take 4 or 5. And at times one would go down, we'd grab another one, and they'd all be gone. They'd all be depleted.
And this brings up a really great question to me in my mind, and this is something that I've heard from people that watch the UFO Classified. The question of, when you've got the Skinwalker Ranch show and you've got, they're saying, okay, this equipment fails, this is a failing, blah, 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 but yet the microphone packs are staying on. They're battery operated, the cameras are rolling, nothing else is happening but the equipment that they're allegedly using to monitor the activity. And that simply, in my opinion, isn't a logical thing.
Well, I believe that too, what you're saying exactly. That can really be a dead giveaway. But I will go in and say that I do believe that this intelligence phenomenon has the ability to pinpoint things, the effects of what it wants to take out and do. I don't believe that's beyond the realm of their possibility to do that. Now, for whatever reason, if they want you to film something and experience something, document for whatever reason, I believe it could well be that they wouldn't take that piece of equipment out. But, it does kind of indicate that there's something going on there that, if the battery pack to your camera's up in your circuitry and a high-tech camera's running and it's next to this equipment, that, it wouldn't be affected. But
I'm just throwing that out there. It is very interesting. I thank you for answering that. And so you have an experience, you have these health effects. Obviously Ted was very ill as well. Tell us about the health effects that other people have had that have been on the property.
Well, I will tell you, for a long time, the one property owner out there, after that happened to Ted and I with the light beam experience, we told him about the light beam experience, and we didn't want to fill him in on the physical effects. We didn't want to scare him. And of course, you're out there, the man's so gracious, you're on his property. You don't want to worry him in the aspect of maybe we get hurt out there or injured, that he's going to face some kind of a lawsuit, or, we're injured on his property. And so we never went there with him. We weren't completely honest with him about our personal effects and other team members. Now, in hindsight, I will tell you that was absolutely the wrong thing to do. And always be completely honest with the individuals you're dealing with and tell them everything. Because several years later, when I did inform the property owner about my own personal health experiences, and I told him about my scalp, you could have knocked me over with a feather when the man says, well, Tom, I had that several times. And I said, you did? And I said, well, what did you do? And he said, well, I went in town to the doctor, and he said he looked at it, and he said he just gave me some lotion to put on. And I said, well, what did he say you had? And he said, he told me I just had touchy scalp. But I said, so you had this 3 times? And I told the individual, and he said, yeah, I always in conjunction, usually with a light beam, viewing a light beam. So there you have the instant. Had we known that, at the time, that would have been documentation that would have verified our experience. And usually if we couldn't if we couldn't document things 3 times, that was Ted's scientific process, we wouldn't claim it. And believe me, there were a lot of materials, a lot of things that happened that Ted didn't document because we couldn't back it up with documentation. So you have that, but yeah, always be completely honest with the people you're dealing with.
And so, and I have to ask you, because you mentioned that with your health effects and things that happened, I mean, you sought medical attention, and you have those records. Are those something that you are planning on sharing with researchers or other people in the community?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, like I said, I have the documentation that it occurred, my surgeries, what I went through. Now, do they go beyond the realm in the scientific? Was it the scientific data or anything taken from my case individually? There's no research work done on it. It's just the documentation that it happened. Of course, local rural doctor, it's very limited, the reports, but the surgeries I had, and the document that it happened, that is what I have now. How useful that would be to go from that now, in a scientific aspect of it, there's just not much, unfortunately, could be done. At the time, if we'd have got in there and looked, but there again, the thing when you're dealing with microwave in the microwave frequency range, it's a hard animal to nail down. You can only determine it was that by the special effects it has on what it does, because unlike other radiations, it doesn't leave a calling card. It's just like as simple as Ted used. You put a piece of meat in a microwave oven and cook it. You take it out. There's no residual anything. There better not be. When you eat that piece of meat, it's clean. It's the microwave energy is just an animal that when it's there, it's there. And believe me, it can be specifically manipulated. It's amazing the amount of things you can even do. Just volumes of work you can do with microwave energy. Intelligence work, you can use it as a pinpoint weapon. And there's a thing called, I don't know if you're familiar with, now they're dealing with Havana. And
yes, I was just going to bring that up. Yeah,
the microwave auditory effect, where individuals been exposed to this have had ear bleeds, they've had brain damage, people hear clicks, and people hear voices, and there actually is documentation we have in the device now that can transmit voices with microwave energy, which you can imagine what you could do to someone with that. One individual out of a crowd could be pinpointed and hear voices,
right?
And surrounding people would hear nothing. This voice materializes in your cranium. So it's an incredible useful tool and can be very detrimental.
Absolutely. And I do think the Havana syndrome is yeah, that is interesting. And I think the technologies that have been developing, I mean, this isn't new. This is stuff that we've been working on for decades. And it is, it is interesting to me to see some of the people who are involved in the subject that have backgrounds in non-lethal weapons technologies and psychological warfare.
Yeah, so, and it started being, there were people in World War II, technicians working in high-gain radars and things, approaching with microwave energy, that started actually hearing transmissions, voices in their head being in proximity to these towers and that. And they found out that it was the transmission. And, like the person that discovered the microwave range for cooking, had a candy bar in his pocket and it melted. And that's how they found out it was useful for cooking. So, but it can have extremely good uses and extremely bad.
Right, absolutely. And yes, and it's like you said, it's just so hard to pinpoint,
Yes.
what a perfect weapon, what a perfect,
Yes.
it's just really
Yes.
frightening. And so again, Peter asked a question about the light beam, and could you ever catch that on photograph or video?
We tried it for that, and in fact that changed the process. When Adam and I we were in the deer stand, and we put away, as I say, and it sounds like a cop out, I know, unless you've been in it, we put away all our equipment, camera equipment. It's an incredibly bad, stupid thing to do, but 30 degrees, all these hours, we're closing up shop, and we did. We learned from that. Always had one person dedicated with a live camera, always ready. And in fact, when we had monitoring stations at 1, 2, and 3, we had we found out the hard way, always place a camera on the structure we're in. If we have a remote monitoring station, always put a camera monitoring that station externally. And there's reasons for that I could go into, but it changed our procedure. But the short answer, no, we never caught that. Because like Ted said, the instant that we had out there, yeah, we did have a camera in the back of the vehicle, and we didn't get it. Just so overwhelmed us. We were responding to the moment, and incredibly unprofessional as we were not doing that. But it does sneak up on you, and that's life. That's what happened, But no, we don't have an image. I wish we did.
Right. And it is, yeah, that is interesting. I know that they have reported things similar to that in Norway. And so it is quite curious. And I mean, so I'm just trying to think, there's so many questions I have for you. My mind is racing a million miles a minute. But I mean, have you ever had, through your research, people approach you that you thought were maybe disingenuous as to the reasons for them approaching you? Were they trying to get information from you either to maybe make money off of things? Was there some sort of intelligence gathering about what you were doing at Marley Woods? Have you ever had any of those experiences?
Yeah, I personally have had that experience with people that, let's just say that knowledge is power, and they feel that if they have the knowledge, they want to capture every bit of knowledge, and whether they pay for it or they finagle their way into your trust. And believe me, they're very devious sometimes of trying to gain friendship with you. And there's organizations I'm not going to name now, but that, yeah, I've been approached, and Ted was too. And that really gets involved in Ted's Moonshaft project. That there were times he really was physically in danger on his Moonshaft project. And
let's talk about that, because I mean, this was something where he was traveling overseas.
Yes.
And this is something that not a lot of people know about. And so I'm going to show a slide.
Yeah, that's the Moonshaft drawn actually by Anton Hurak, that man that was involved in the whole case. And but that is the moon shape. The crescent thing you see there on the left is actually, this is like a cut through drawing of the mountain, and the crescent shape is why the name Moonshaft. It's shaped like a crescent moon, and virtually this is an object, and it goes back. I'll just give you a very brief, condensed story, the Moonshaft story, and I will add that we're working on that now, trying to do that whole. But there again, it's Ted was involved, and here again, this involves Alan Hynek was brought into this case back in the origin. A man named Anton Hurak, which was a Czech mining engineer, which came from a very wealthy family in Slovakia. He actually, and it's so incredible, this, like Ted said, this is the greatest story never told. Anton Hurak was a very educated man. He had very many degrees. He spoke, I think, 6 or 7 languages. He knew mining, but when the Nazis came in World War II, they took his family resident, took the wealth, just mainly kicked the family out, and Anton joined the underground and was captured and kept in a concentration camp. He escaped at one point with a couple of his men. As he escapes, they get wounded, and they get towards a mountainous area. A sheep herder named a Slovak finds him, takes him in, and has injured 2 men, hides him in a cave, which to this day caves are really, in fact, I was told that it's still to this day illegal to explore caves in that region for whatever reason. But he hid him in a cave. He told him he blessed him, gave him the rights, blessed him, covered the cave up, brought him food and water over days. And as they were in the cave hiding from the Nazis, actually the individual that hid him in the cave told him, he said, "This cave is haunted. Please don't go into it any deeper. Just stay in the mouth." Well, him being a mining engineer and boredom, over a process of 3 days, he worked his way deeper in the cave to the point he got into a large chamber, and he discovered a black onyx-like polished substance in a crescent shape. And this thing had stalagmites growing over it. It had a crack or fissure at the bottom. He was able to, he took off most of his clothes to squeeze through this crack, this fissure. And the walls of this crack were, as he kept a beautiful diary. It's the most wonderful writing you've ever read. It's the man's own writing. The walls of this were 8 foot thick that he squeezed through. He gets in there, slides down a slight embankment to the bottom. Over a couple days, digging in the debris in this, he finds even fossils of cave bear teeth, which dates how long this was been there, just eons. And the process of digging down to the bottom, when he gets to the bottom of this thing digging, he gets into some very fine debris dust, and it blows into his face. A warm air hits him in the face, and the man lays this down. He describes he found a 1-inch wavy metal grill in this thing. And now this makes absolutely no sense. An object like this buried in a mountain in Slovakia, nothing else around. But he put his head down and he listened, and he described what he could hear, the sounds of heavy turbines running deep below. Now, the man knew machinery, knew mining, he knew engineering. He knew this was nothing that could be natural, or even the material this was made. In one instant, he even fired his military rifle at this thing and made a green spark that didn't damage it much at all. So there you have a technology that's self-maintaining, running for eons. And for what possible purpose? How did this thing get there? It's just an incredible story. So he works his way back out. The sheep herder and the family comes and gets him, said the Nazis are gone. They take the people, and in the process, one of his men dies in the mouth of the cave, and they inscribed on the walls of the cave their initials, the date, and there were several feet of bloody bandages left in the mouth of the cave. And Ted actually, after he dealt with Hynek and Anton Horek, and Anton had made his way back to the United States after the war, and Anton set him up with the original family that got him to this cave. And Ted actually made 2 trips there, found the cave. Unfortunately, when the Nazis, so many men had got into that area escaping, they carpet bombed this area, and they caused a partial cave-in this cave. So Ted's plan on the 3rd trip was always to go back, and they were going to excavate to get in this thing again. And unfortunately, the geopolitical climate at the time, and this will blow your mind. A lot of people, I know you know, that Jackie Gleason was very well into paranormal and ufology. He got hooked up because Alan Hynek knew all the entertaining field. He knew everybody. He had actually set up, Jackie Gleason was going to fund the 3rd trip back to excavate this thing. And the geopolitical climate at the time, the Russians moved in, and that's what happened.
Wow, and I want to show another
That's
photo.
Another view from the side of this craft, or the moon shaft. And the crack you see there with the arrow pointing to it is actually where he squeezed in at the bottom of this. Now, he had a weak carbon arc torch or light that he shone. He couldn't see the ceiling of this with the primitive light he had. It went up, extended that far in the mountain, he couldn't see a top in it. And he had the grid below him. So, but that's his own sketch in his diary, what you have there. And Ted had portions of the diary Anton gave him. So that's the man's own beautiful drawing of what he found.
Wow, and that's incredible. And so you mentioned that Ted felt like his life was in danger. Can
Yeah.
you describe that situation?
Yeah. On his last trip, when he was getting out on his second trip, and he was met at the airport by a group of Russians that offered him, because the thing about it is that Ted had researched the Nazi history in the area, and he actually come to believe, of course, Adolf Hitler had a whole team of spelunkers and geologists always looking for things. And the story of how Adolf Hitler was made aware of Moonshaft that goes into volumes itself. But I won't go there. But I will tell you that the Nazis were looking for this. The Russians, of course, took over that history. The Russians were looking for Moonshaft because they felt there was a technology in there that would help them win the war. At least that was Adolf Hitler's theory. And on his last trip, leaving at the airport, he was met by a company of Russians that offered Ted their assistance if he would bring them in on where it was and everything. And as Ted told us, he said, well, yeah, they'd have brought me in it all right. And if they'd have found it, that'd been the last of Ted, So thinking as Ted, the man was just so ingenious, he drug out a map that he had of the area, unmarked, and he quickly, it's in the Tetra Mountain Range, which joins to the Carpathian Mountain Range, and he drew a line where he said it was in the Carpathian Mountain Range, and he said, I picked out the roughest area, most dangerous area in the Carpathian Mountain Range that there was, and he said, I could always picture Russians falling to their death looking for this thing in the wrong mountain range. But he gave them that map and said he would be back to work with them. And he got out basically by doing that. So it was touch and go when he left the last time, I will tell you.
Well, and so I mean, was there ever any other contact with anybody like that could have been, trying to get information from him?
I will tell you that up to probably 7 years ago, that he was contacted yet by Russian people to try to work with him on that. And here again, moving forward now, I was in agreement with a company, and we're still working on it, trying to do a production on the Moonshaft story, a documentary, maybe going into a series. And what happens when I do have the contact. I talk about once a month to the original relatives of the family there that want to work with us, again, over there in Slovakia. And, but then again, now I can't explain to you how difficult it's been now. Here again, geopolitically, we're in another war in that region. And the people that live there, Slovakia is still not too affected, except they're taking on Rhine. They're just the refugees coming in Slovakia. They have their hands full now taking care of refugees. And but as of now, they're not being affected too much by this. But I will tell you that some of the local people feel that this is going to spread eventually into their area. And I hope it doesn't. But we're still proceeding. And here again, in a geopolitical climate that's closing the door on this again. So,
and it's a frightening time in the world right now, and that is what an interesting thing. And so and go back, and I'm sorry if you mentioned this, but so he was first introduced to this case by Hynek?
No, actually, Ted brought in Alan Hynek.
Okay.
A good friend of Ted's brought in that heard of this individual through actually, I think it got into a National Geographic reporter got into the history of this individual. And I'm not going to go into the National Geographic thing, but if you've ever worked with them, it's a challenge, but which Ted found out. But a friend of Ted's introduced him to Anton Hurek and his wife, and he told Ted the whole situation story. And Ted called up Alan and said, Alan, you really need, you're not going to believe this. I really believe this. You need to, Alan and Ted spent a couple weeks with the man and his wife, and he's so convinced. He had the documentation and the diary, which is beautiful. And actually, he had the cave bear teeth, which fossil, not even fossilization, but actual cave bear teeth are actually worth several $1,000s. They're so old now. But Alan was so captivated and convinced by this, he told Ted, we gotta work, we gotta move on this. We gotta do this. It's so incredibly important to science and the possibilities that this thing's there, what it means. We just have to do it. So Ted actually brought Alan Hynek in, and I have a photo. I did not send that to you. I will, of Alan Hynek and Anton Hurek together. So
wow.
But
what a fascinating story. And I mean, it's just interesting, you know, I mean, Hynek, and then, you know,
and it goes back to history of Anton Hurek. His family actually sold the first radium to Madame Curie. She bought her first, you know, uranium from Anton Hurek's family, his mines.
Wow.
So I can't tell you all the avenues this goes down. As Ted said, and even Alan Hynek said, they felt it was the greatest story never told. And I will tell you, there are so many people looking for this cave yet. When we'd be out on a lecture circuit, people would bring, on YouTube, especially when YouTube came up, there would be people making claims they found moonshaft, and Ted would take one look at the topography, the area, and I mean, we were always worried, you know, did they really find this? It's possible, but Ted would take one look at the photograph and he said, no, that's totally wrong geology, the wrong kind of topography. They haven't found it. And as Ted said, that the cave, it's a small entrance that the sheep herder had slid a rock down in front of this opening that goes into an extensive cave, you know, structure. And Ted said, Tom, and Ted actually, here's another thing. He was a spelunker and recognized by the Missouri Society. He was in the caving for years when he was young. He knew geology. He knew caves like the back of his hand. And Ted told me, he said, Tom, if they would not have showed me where this opening was in this mountainous, a 3-day hike in the most rugged terrain you can imagine, I would not have found this cave or even known it was there. So he always felt like if you don't know where it's at, it's not going to be found. Now, with modern technologies, he felt possibly someday it could be, you know, but.
And it's fascinating. And I want to just read a comment from Jim, who's staying up late. Jim, I don't know if you're still there. I know you're, yeah, I appreciate your comments, but he says that it sounds like Shaver's Dero 7 tarot. And so like with the Shaver mysteries, have you heard anything about that?
No, unfortunately, I haven't.
Okay.
I do know there's supposedly, at last count, there's supposedly 5 other structures like this been found. Now, there are a couple more in Slovakia. There's actually one in the United States, and which that was in a piece of property that they found it through a coal mine, I understand, and the family that owned it was a small mine. Actually, we were informed, or Ted was years ago. Actually, the mine was bought out by the government for whatever reasons. You can draw your own conclusions, but it got out of personal property and it was bought out by the government. The one location where there was one of these things located in this country. And people asked Ted, well, why didn't you go try to find the other ones in Slovakia? Well, there again, limited resources. You go with what you know, you go with what you have. He could be taken to this one. He went with what he had. And there again, what the purpose of these things are, you know, who knows? One individual had told Ted there on his last trip, and he didn't have time to research it because they had claimed that ancient wood carvings in that part of the region depicted one day a object came out of the sky and embedded itself in a mountain. And every day, the local people that were afraid of it, they watched it actually as if it melted deeper and deeper into this mountaintop and go down. And there was an explosion at some point, and they claimed that the local residents had got there and picked up fragments of something after this explosion. And Ted spoke with these people, and they claimed to still have these pieces in this one area, in this village. Of course, Ted was leaving that last time, and he didn't get back to do this. He always figured that was one of his key interests when he returned, was to investigate that claim. So you can see this goes so many directions over there. But with limited resources and time, you do the best you can with what you got.
Right, absolutely. And how fascinating for him that must have been. Did he ever talk about perhaps having people around him that he trusted, that he later second guessed their judgment? Because I think you had mentioned, a little bit ago, you have people that try to come into your world and try to gain your confidence and then do whatever they're going to do with the information or try to manipulate you in a specific way. Did he ever feel like that was taking place with any of his close colleagues?
Oh, yeah, with some of his colleagues. He didn't experience it that much because he was lucky in one regard, and some people might say in another regard he was cursed. But working with Alan, and they were associated with Blue Book and intelligence people, which when Ted went overseas, he would work directly with intelligence people. So he did have that, you might say, watching his back. And he worked with, you might say, the individuals that in some cases are reported to approach other things, and be the bad guys. And there really was no, as deemed, the Men in Black syndrome or anything like that. No. I mean, there still is people, believe me, involved, trying to get information and access to everything. Yes, there is. And I think mainly a lot of it is just financial gain. And some groups, it's like I said, knowledge is power, and they want the power, that goes with it, they feel. So, but he didn't experience that element to any large degree. He really didn't.
That's good. Do you know if he ever worked with, were Hal Puthoff or Kit Green or those people that were associated with Bigelow? I mean, did they ever come into the picture at any point in time?
No, they really didn't. There were a few people that Ted worked with. They were some military officers that actually some of the things Ted was involved in, he did get statements from them. Unfortunately, we were always against the clock. As I'm well aware now, I can't believe I'm going to be 68, and it blows my mind. I just can't believe it. But the time element, the people he worked with, unfortunately, individuals he worked with in that era are all gone. And as Ted told me, he says, Tom, even with statements, documentation, you're telling a story. You don't have the individuals there. Everybody's gone. It's a story. And so, and Ted being the man of science he was, if he couldn't document it three ways, and with no doubt, he wouldn't go there. And that's right. That's the way we roll. Yeah.
And so I'm going to show some other photos because, like I said, you were so kind to send me some of these things and then explain the photo, because this is very interesting. So I'm going to show this.
Yeah, that is the light phenomenon. That is what we deem the shield, and that was from a light source that we had taken photographs several times. On one particular instance, Ted really super magnified the instance and used some software to try to clean it up as much as he could. And he was really astounded when he showed me the image. He just told me, he said, Tom, you got to see this. It looks like a doorway, and I'm not even going to go into what else it looks like, but I'm going to call it the shield. It looks like a doorway. And I will tell you, it intrigued me so. It blew me away. And I had a friend, an individual on Facebook, and I never really drew the similarity that close or the correlation, but he sent me a shield, a photo or a painting of a close-up of a shield of a Templar cross on it that was kind of blurry. And he put it side by side, this image that I showed you. And I just looked at it and I said, well, I'm not going to go there, but it sure. But it is intriguing, I'll tell you.
How fascinating. So give us like the background on when and where and how that photo was taken.
Yeah, that was taken from we had a large deck around on the second level on Site 1 on the facility, which was to the north of Site 2 and 3. And the light source always come up on Site 2 as the crow flies about a mile away on one particular knoll or hillside. And that was taken high magnification through, and there's another image you have through the trees of what the light source looked like. It looked like a fire. There you go. That's the image. And it was of an intense self-illumination that's unbelievable. And Ted took that in that on one occasion, that's where Ted got the shield image in the middle of that light source. Now, Ted always felt that was like a portal, or it could be a gateway. And Ted, as he told me so often, he said, Tom, in my early days, if I would have said the word portal or gateway, he said, you should have just smacked me. He said, because I wouldn't have went there, but I just feel. And at times he did actually image things that he always felt he could expect anything to come through that. And a couple of times he did take some images of something coming through that. And but he just felt that was really a portal or a doorway.
And let me show this, because I mean, again, I could talk to you all night.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this photo.
That is a rare, and that was not taken by us. That was taken by one of the property owners. That's a rare light ball photo in the daylight yet. And you can see the motion in it, even as quick as the camera was, a digital camera. You can see the motion, the trail there. But that's a light ball, a rare daylight light ball at Marley.
Interesting. Okay, and then this photo.
Yeah, that was Ted. He took that. That is actually, there's a phenomenon out there. The light balls in the north sky come up, and actually they'll come up. You'll see one light ball. They'll go sequential. Sometimes into 5, 6 light balls come out of one. Sometimes you'll just see them split into two, and that was the instant after it split into 2 light balls from one. And Ted always, on some imagery, he felt like there was a kind of a green plasma generated in between the 2 light balls.
That's amazing. It's, yeah, this is very fascinating. And then I want to show another photo again.
Yeah, that's a close-up of the same, where you can kind of see it's actually a little bit earlier photograph in the series of photos. It's just at the instance when 1 becomes 2, and you can kind of see that green plasma-like connection between the 2. And after they separate, then they become more brilliant. But they do go down in brilliance usually when that happens, and then they kick back up in brilliance in a luminosity after they split.
And so what kind of equipment was he using?
He was using, actually in the early days, he used a lot of film. There again, Ted's belief was with film cameras, if you have a negative, there's ways you can really get into the negative, especially slide film. It's especially has a property in slide film negatives that you can really get more information out of that negative than any other way you can. So it was a lot of high-speed camera work, but that was his photos, and he did some amazing. He was a professional photographer at one time. So,
and let me just show this photo.
That's Ted with one of our team members out in the field when we were setting up equipment, and Ted setting up for the night his computers that we had monitoring the cameras, and on site one, usually facing the north, but we learned, we had cameras over time. We had to put cameras every direction, but that's the man himself in the field going over his computers and cameras.
Wow. Okay, and then here's another one.
That's Ted and I after a long morning, a very productive night. We had some good shots. We took photos, and after, from being in there I think that was we got in the field about 2 o'clock on that instant on site one till morning, and a lot of coffee and a lot.
It looks like it, yes.
Yeah.
I bet that was just so cold. And then I want to talk a little bit about, well, first of all, I want to show this photo because here you are.
Oh, yeah, that's I always tease her. That's my sister I never had. And, but Deb and that's Debbie Zieglmeyer. She's actually state director for MUFON now, and a board member of MUFON. And, we started the MUFON dive team under John Schuessler, gave us sanction that for us. And we did we trained divers our thought was that MUFON would have a team of divers whenever anything would enter the water or there would be any involvement, craft going in and out of the water. And on contrary to, and most people don't know this, but water is involved in some way in ufology in almost over 2/3 of the cases. In some way, shape, or form, water is involved. Either craft going in or out, over water, in farm ponds, leaving water residues, farm pond, scum-type residues in areas. And Deb's even written a book about that now. But that's her and I actually doing some diving. And but
that looks like fun.
It is, and it can be very costly, and it'll take it out of you, I'll tell you.
I bet. And so I've got to show too, because and of course, we've got like 6 minutes left, but I want to show this.
Yeah. Now that's getting into the cryptid, the physical trace. As I said before, when these things cross the dimensional boundaries, that was an animal that weighed over 300, estimated by a rancher that could judge the weight of cattle on the hoof in a couple pounds. He estimated this to weigh over 350 pounds. It left physical tracks. We had one-timers, we called it. It put down this track. Ted estimated through compaction, 350 pounds. We found 16-inch white long hairs on the fence, barbed wire fence. Ted had, there they are right there. We did microscopy on that. We couldn't afford DNA work, so one lab that was so intrigued did some pretty crude DNA work back in the day, came up, no known match subject of the hair. They didn't know what it came from. Had pictures of microscopy, totally different structure in the hair. And so what leaves this? And there's tracks on snow and ice, and really intriguing, some of these tracks, you got a 350-pound weight animal going out on the thin ice with snow on it that the rancher said wouldn't supported his weight. And he got to the edge of it, which you can see some of his tracks, and he backed off because he was going to break through the ice. These tracks go out in the middle of the pond and terminate. They don't go across the pond. They go into the middle of the pond, the thinnest, and they terminate. So there again, these things are real when they're there. Was it in a state of transition when it did this? We don't know.
Well, and I've got to, because I have some interesting photos from Skinwalker Ranch that someone took of an alleged print. But clearly, when you look at what you just showed and the cast and things, it's much different than what the photo that I have. So anyway, I'd love to just share that with you to get your to get your input. And I want to just throw this out there to the public. I actually, in the next little bit, I'm going to be releasing all of the 2 years of reports that I have of the Skinwalker Ranch, and also all of the interviews that I've done with the people
great.
in the community for many, many years, as well as, yeah, my own personal information. I think this needs to be done, and I'm not. They're very, very, very good people in that area, and I support them and think that they deserve the best. They deserve truthful information. I will not be monetizing my website, but maybe I should. But then again, I can't create an LLC in Delaware and hide the people that are involved in my entertainment company. Just throwing that out there. And so, but I will be doing that. So you can look for skinwalkerranchutah.com or the Skinwalker Ranch. There are a couple domain names that you can be looking for. I'll make sure that I put that out there to the public, because I think that this is important information for people who are trying to find the truth. I'm really excited about it. I've been working hard at this for a long time. And also, you have people like the legendary Junior Hicks. I'm sure you've heard.
Yes.
Of Junior, and I was fortunate enough to have candid conversations with not only Junior, and to interview him, but also Dr. Frank Salisbury, who wrote the Utah UFO display. And so I look forward to sharing that. And I spent, this is really cool, and I just have to tell you this, you'll appreciate this, but at the University of Utah Special Archives, they have the holdings of Dr. Frank Salisbury, and so you can go up there, and I spent many days up there going through all of his work, and it was just a really remarkable experience to do that. And so the history here in UFO history in Utah is pretty interesting, and it's definitely something that has not gotten out to the general public, because again, it's being bought and sold for entertainment purposes. And that's, I just want to say that I appreciate what you've done. And again, like I've said this several times, the fact that you're keeping the location, you're making sure you're protecting the people at the location. You're not using their stories to help build your brand and make money. This is research, and I think that is very commendable, and more people should be doing what you're doing without making money off of other people's experiences. So, and let me just ask you one more thing too, because as you and I both know, having interviewed the countless people who claim to have experienced things, how do you, like, if you find somebody is giving you information, they feel it is a UFO experience or a paranormal encounter, but it's actually mundane, how do you broach that subject with the witness?
I've always felt that there's no information that's not useful, and usually I will find, when you're with an individual like that, in the process, and like I was trained by Jim Cross, he was an Air Force captain, and believe me, it got in with MUFON in the early days. And I'm sure they're still that thorough, maybe, but even things when you interview a witness, like body language. I mean, he would watch you, and if you were interviewing somebody and in their story, in the process of them telling you their story, if you would even nod your head, like in agreement with them, that's a no-no. You don't even interject body language to influence them. So, I mean, it's a science when you're in with a person, and the process of interviewing, and it's not a quick process, it can go on days, weeks, as months, years. But you usually dig deeper. The most mundane thing, usually at the end of a statement, you ask a question and you think you're done, and you'll just ask the question and follow up. And, oh, well, yeah, I've had that, or, well, oh, yeah, I've had that experience or seen that. And then it usually becomes much more. So I have really yet to find something that, when you dig a little deeper, there's usually always a lot more to the story than what even they realize sometimes,
And I mean, if you come across people that you've interviewed that you feel have perhaps mental illness,
You very rarely, really, very, as far as people being fabricating things or actual mental illness, I it's very rare. I would say, in all my experience and people I've known, gone on far longer than I have, I would say that's less than 3%. I really do. I really believe it's now. Sometimes the people you deal with seem a little out there, but you can't just throw out the baby with the bathwater there either. They have a unique way of relaying things to you sometime, and when you dig deeper, you find out that there is a core truth to what they're saying, even if they're kind of a strange individual.
Well, and thank you for answering that. And I'm sitting here thinking that, when I look at, what you've done, and you and Ted with the Marley Woods, and making sure that people in that area, I mean, that people don't know the location, and so you don't have a lot of outside influence
Right.
tainting the reports that you're getting from individuals.
Right.
And that, to me, when you've got a location and you're broadcasting the location, you're involving people in the community, you're bringing people on that have had, maybe experiences or maybe not, and things that definitely muddies the water and makes, in my opinion, that it's not the way you should do research.
Right. And you're dealing with people sometimes that these things, have affected their children and family members, and believe me, it's a sensitive area to get into sometimes with people, and to gain that trust, where they trust you, and you just can't betray that, and there again, as Alan Hynek said so beautifully, ridicule is not part of the scientific process, and Jock says that too, it's just not the way things are done, and so. But I will say that out of all my experience, people I worked with, I just believe it's probably even less than 3% are fabricated or mentally, incompetent people, or just it's so much more there. And I will tell you some of the high strangeness of reports that you get in cases you work on, and it's getting stranger. I will tell you. I'm not in MUFON anymore. I don't have the time or resources, but my dive team buddy, Debbie Zieglmeyer, and her assistant, Margie Kay, in Kansas City, her number 2, they fill me in at times. We had some cryptid reports of metallic flying creatures out there, sort of, and reptilian. And when I was involved in MUFON, we never had any reports of flying, reptilian type creatures, metallic in some instance, but they're getting those now. Now, how do you explain that?
Do you think, though, that could be an influence of the media and culture? I mean, now you've got, of course, people talking about cryptids and dino beavers and all sorts of fantastic things that aren't necessarily.
I absolutely do, and I do believe what it could be, a direct link like that is. Here again, I told you that this intelligence has the ability to give artificial sensations. Now, does it pick up on what's in what a person expects to see, or he has access to the media and sees? And then he goes out where he might have seen a classic disc, and now he's seeing a metallic, winged creature. It's possible, Now that doesn't mean there's not something there. It just means, and far people above my pay grade have said, this has the ability to work your mentality, and whether it's a form of cloaking or just. And I do believe at times fear is a factor. It uses fear, whether it feeds on it or uses it as a tool. But and then there's those that believe right now the dimensional boundaries are getting weaker and more things are coming across. So, and there again, Ted's theory was when it moved away from the structured craft to the light balls more, which he really loved, and it got into more light bulbs all over. He believed as our technology increased, they were lowering their risk factor. You know, a metallic craft, you can shoot it down, you can get a piece. When a light bulb's there as a form of natural, like an ROV, you know, like we use submersibles. When a light bulb's there again, it's there. When it's gone, what do you got? You can maybe monitor it when it's there, but that's all you can possibly get. So as our technology increased, that's what they did. So you have that possibility.
Well, I mean, it's fascinating. There's so many possibilities out there. And I just, you know, every day I go to bed questioning one thing, waking up believing another, or leading, you know, going down a different path. But it is fascinating. And this has been a delightful conversation and very eye-opening. And I know that, you know, you have people out there that are supportive of your work and that honor the memory of Ted. And I think that's incredible that you're working to, again, kind of get his information preserved and put out to the public. And that's great. And so where can people find you if you want them to find you?
Okay. Till we get our website up, I have a YouTube channel. I've got a dozen movies or documentaries there, just quick, give you a taste of what Marley was, what we did, who Ted Phillips, the early years was. You can get on there free, watch those movies. You can go on, I use my Facebook page and the Ted Phillips Marley Woods Research Center page. You can join that. We keep up. You join that. Anybody can join. You get the latest information, what we're doing, what's happening at Marley Woods there. And right now, those are the three best ways.
Thank you. Well, I'm excited. And I mean, I look forward to talking to you more, because I'm sure I need to pick your brain about specific things. And again, I would love to get back to doing field research. I think that's great. And I'm hoping with the launch of the new website that I'll be taking a little trip out near the ranch soon. So I'll keep you posted on that as well.
Well, that's great. And we have a production coming out in probably first part of August. I'll keep it up and keep you informed when it airs.
Thank you.
And we're doing other projects. Like I said, we're still working on Slovak Moonshaft. We haven't given up on that yet. So, but look for good things, and we'll keep you informed. Stay tuned.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tom. You were,
thank you so much. It's been so good to talk to you again.
Absolutely. When you talk to Bruce, please give him my love.
I will. And he so respects you, I will tell you. He talks about you every time.
Oh, he's so kind. Like I said, it's been so neat to meet him and get to know him, and he's just a good, kind human being.
I'd like to get him on here sometime with you. And he'll be up for that, I'll tell you.
Okay, I can't wait. That'd be good. And I'm just sending positive energy to him, and I hope that he feels better. And also Ray Boucher as well, who's been on the show, and he's undergoing chemo. You know, again, so we've got so many good people that
we do.
We need, I'm privileged to know them and to do the show and interview people. So thank you, Tom, for being here. This has been wonderful.
Oh, thank you. It's been wonderful. I've really enjoyed it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I want to just thank, all of you guys for listening, for supporting UFO Classified. I want to thank all of my Patreons for supporting the show. I want to thank Mario and Peter as well for helping me behind the scenes to promote the show and keep the show on the air. This, for me, is a labor of love, but I couldn't think of a better way to spend a Friday night. Next week, we are going to have Dave Beatty on, who will be talking about his latest article that hit the debrief. That will be fascinating. I also have Stephen Greenstreet in the pipes. That's going to be interesting as well because of his latest interview or video that you should see on OSAP and ATIP, and some of the interesting questions that are being raised about that. So you can look forward to that. And also, I potentially might have a certain person from Harvard coming on the show, so keep your fingers crossed on that. Good things are happening. I love you guys. Thank you for watching UFO Classified. Be safe and enjoy your spring, and I will catch you next week. Okay.